Hello, and welcome back to Baby Elias's stories. We now return to Blade Runner 3, Replicant Night, by K. W. Jeter. Chapter 6. Patience was never much of a virtue with you, Deckard. The briefcase sat surrounded by moldering rubble, scummed coffee cups, stubs of ersatz tobacco disintegrating within. I don't know how you ever got to be a cop. You act cold. You always did. But you know what? You're not. I'll take that as a compliment. Deckard reached for the brown glass. If you'll spare me any more crap. The briefcase laughed. That's how you should take it, since there aren't going to be any others. Compliments, I mean. You look like hell, Deckard. I don't even have eyes, and I can tell that. I can hear it in your voice. The ravages of a guilty conscience, I suppose. Deckard shrugged. I wouldn't have killed you except I had to. Another sip. You were trying to kill me, remember? Oh, that. Forget about it, said Batty's voice. These things happen. Besides, it was poor old Holden who fired the shot, technically. He gets the credit for the hit. The department may even have given him a bonus for taking me out. He never told me for sure, though. Hard guy to get to know, even when he's taunting you around by the handle. Genuine cold. Even colder now. Yeah. The briefcase emitted a sigh. Oh, poor bastard. And him walking around with that latest heart and lung implant. All that cranking machinery that the LAPD surgeons had put inside him. Batty's voice went silent for a moment, then came back, softer and musing. You know, I was starting to feel a little sympathy for Holden before he got iced back there at Outer Hollywood. Sort of a kinship, if you know what I mean. Here I am, stuck in this box. Implanted, right? Inside a device. And Holden had a box inside his chest, stuffed full of little gizmos, keeping him alive the same way this one does for me, sort of. So what was the essential difference? Deckard didn't even bother to shrug. None, he said, that I can think of, especially since you're both working for the LAPD, or were, in Holden's case. Pardon me? Batty's voice kicked back up in volume. What the hell did you say? Come on. Anger more than alcohol unleashed Deckard's tongue. Let's not screw around, all right. I didn't carry you back here all the way from Outer Hollywood just so you could feed me a line of bullshit. This is a police operation. What else could it be? I've seen these box jobs before. This is how the department preserves anybody who's been iced before they've finished extracting information from him. Standard operating procedure. The department's tech surgeons scrape up the body, the way they must have scraped you up from that broken up old freeway where I left you. They do a deep core retrieval from whatever cellular activity is left in the brain and spine, then download it into a storage unit, like this briefcase you're sitting in. Then I wouldn't be working for the department, would I? Batty's voice tightened. Since these box jobs, as you call them, are something they do to people who've been offed by the cops. Cops get 'em too, said Deckard warily, killed in the line of duty. Especially if it happens to investigators or detectives who didn't get a chance to make a report before they took a bullet. It's even happened to a few Blade Runners. just part of the hazards of the job. You'd better get your head straightened out, Deckard. The personality and mind implanted inside the briefcase audibly bristled. First thing, jettison the notion that I'm part of some LAPD operation. I'm not, and neither was Dave Holden. Oh? Deckard tapped the edge of the glass. What happened? He quit the force? That's exactly right. He walked. Deckard snorted. Hard to believe. Why, you did the same once. That was different. You give yourself too much credit, Deckard. Batty's voice sneered at him. For uniqueness. Think you're the only ex-cop who got that way from a bad conscience? Deckard nodded, even though he knew the briefcase couldn't see him. The only one I ever knew. That's because you were always such a loner. If you Blade Runners had ever hung out together instead of always scheming against each other in department politics, you might have had a chance. Deckard said nothing. The voice coming out of the briefcase had touched a nerve, a line into his memory and all that had happened back in LA. He told himself that he wasn't going to think about that stuff anymore, that there wasn't any point to it. The whole anti-Blade Runner conspiracy riff that he'd gotten wind of from Holden and Batty when he'd still been walking around as a human being. All of which might have been true, with conspiracies wrapped inside larger ones, legions of endless night. He didn't care. Not anymore. He'd had his fill, even before he'd been sucked into Sarah Tyrell's private conspiracy. Her queen and pawns maneuvering all to destroy the Tyrell Corporation, everything that her hated uncle had created. Eldon Tyrell's works turned to ashes, his memory locked inside that dark place inside Sarah's skull, where she was still a child, and he was the king of the only world she knew. Deckard had had a glimpse in there, and he didn't want to see any more. Enough that Sarah's vengeance-driven scheming had robbed him as well of those last, carefully measured hours he could have spent with Rachel. The real Rachel, or as much real as any replicant could be. Which, as far as Deckard was concerned, was more real than the human original could be. Even when Sarah had tried to pass herself off as Rachel, he had known the truth before she had slipped up, long before the emigrant ship had left Earth, that Rachel was already dead, and that Sarah could never be her, even though she was identical in every way but one. And that one thing wasn't part of her, but was located inside him, so deep she could never reach it. These are things you need to deal with, Deckard. Batty's words had broken the course of his thoughts. It took him a moment to adjust. What things? If there's still an operational conspiracy against the Blade Runners, then your ass is still on the line. You can't hide. Your cover's blown. Everybody knows where you are. How do you think Holden and I were able to track you down so easily? Big deal, Deckard shrugged. You had contacts, probably with the video people, that Benton guy. When they had the video ready for release, they were planning on doing a whole publicity trip that they'd had me signed on as technical advisor during the taping. That's what they were paying me for. My name. So it wasn't going to be a secret for very long. Holden must have caught a leak from the production. That's all. A couple of minutes ago, the briefcase said dryly, You were figuring that Holden must have still been working for the LAPD. You really think that the department gets its information from camera operators who can't keep their mouths shut? Come on, you know they don't work that way. Admit it, this has got all the smell of high-level spookiness. Maybe. No maybe about it, Deckard. Batty's voice tightened, wire-like. You know it already. Holden wasn't LAPD, at least not when he showed up there at Outer Hollywood. He was as quit as you were. That's why you took me when you left the station to come back to this rat trap. If you'd really thought that I was part of a police operation of any kind, you would have booted this fine quality briefcase right out of the skiff's waste chute somewhere in transit. I'd be talking to myself out in the cold, cold vacuum right now. At least until my batteries ran down. He's right, thought Deckard. That mind, with all of its mercenary hitman sharps, was still there, intact. Batty, boxed or not, could read right into his soul and see what was written there. I was curious. Deckard could hear his own flat, defensive voice, defensive words. I just wanted to see what this whole game was about. That's why I took you with me. Yeah, right. And risk having me turn out to be a homing device? So the authorities could track where you went as soon as you left the station? You could pull my other leg if I had any. All right. For a long moment, Deckard remained silent, then reached for the glass. He held it to his mouth, but didn't drink, only inhaled the acrid fumes. Then he pushed the chair back and stood up, carrying the glass to the sink and pouring it out. The brown liquid sluiced through the scabbed dishes and down the reluctant drain. He couldn't afford to go under the alcohol tide. Not now. He'd brought something else back with him, besides the briefcase. Fear. The unease gnawing at his synapses. The twitch of rigid neck muscles and crawl of prickling skin. The mute awareness of something closing in on him, its teeth not yet revealed. That sense had begun rising along his spine as he'd looked down at the corpse of Dave Holden at his feet. Go ahead, Deckard said as he sat back down. He'd carried the briefcase here, hoping for answers. I'll accept that you're not part of some police operation, so start talking. Who sent you? Who sent me? The one-cornered smile returned to Batty's voice. Or, who sent Holden? The two of you. Deckard leaned back in his chair, legs sprawled under the table. Together, your little buddy team. If it wasn't LAPD, I can't figure it being the UN. Their security agencies wouldn't bother tracking me down at the outer Hollywood station. They'd nail me here. Everything on Mars is a UN operation, except for the cable monopoly. And they're in each other's pockets. Work on it, Deckard. Who else out there has got an interest in replicants and the people who go around hunting them down? The replicants themselves, he shrugged. That's all. The only problem with that theory, said the briefcase, is that replicants, escape replicants, especially on the run, they don't have any resources. They're just hiding out, staying low for as long as they can, trying to keep alive. What kind of operation could they put together? You think they could have managed to get me scrapped off that freeway wall where you left me, get my cerebral contents transferred into this thing, and send Holden out to deliver me to you? Probably not. You got that one right. But there are others, aren't there? others who are, shall we say, concerned about the replicants and what happens to them. Concerned in ways besides just wanting to kill them off. For Christ's sake, Deckard, you ran into them yourself, back in L.A. You must have. All right, I know who you're talking about. Deckard gave a dismissive gesture with one hand. The sympathizers, the rep simps. He shook his head. You gotta be joking. You gotta be joking, Batty. That bunch of losers, street corner evangelists, tub thumpers. There's more to them, said Batty, than just that. Sure, some of them are loose cannon terrorists, getting themselves blown away by the police. For what? For the sake of shooting down some obnoxious UN advertising blimp? Deckard had seen that for himself when he'd been on the run in LA's maze of streets, his first exposure to the rep simp phenomenon. He'd heard more about them since then. So these head cases can dig up a few military surplus mortar rounds and hit a floating view screen. I'm not impressed. Stop being such a dumb cop. The voice turned harsher. Get with the program, Deckard. The rep simps you saw on the street, the screamers, the terrorists, the religious types out in the sideways zone, those are all the fringe elements. The fact that you see those people running around at all should have told you something. It should have been the tip-off that there would be others that you don't see, ones whose brains aren't cracked, ones who've got their agenda going in a whole different way. You ran into one of those as well. That guy, Isidore, at the Van Nuys Pet Hospital. Yeah, I remember him. But he was a loner, a one-man operation. That's what you think? For Christ's sake, Deckard, use your head. Disgust tinged Batty's voice. Isidore was working right in the center of L.A., disguising escaped replicants as humans, disguising them so well that your big deal Blade Runner unit didn't have a chance of catching them, and he was getting away with it. If your girlfriend Sarah Tyrell hadn't sent her pet hitman out to take care of him, Isidore would still be in operation. The girlfriend crack nettled Deckard, but he kept himself from rising to the bait. That doesn't prove Isidore wasn't working alone, or that he had some kind of high-level connections covering his ass. Deckard shrugged. Maybe he was just lucky, or at least he was, until the end. For a few seconds, the briefcase was silent. Then it emitted a low, mocking fragment of laughter. Come on, Deckard. There's no such thing as luck. If something happens, it's for a reason. If Isidore was getting away with disguising replicants as human, and he was doing it right in the face of the LAPD, you can bet he had some powerful friends on his side. People who are just as concerned about what happens to escaped replicants as Isidore was. Batty's smile threaded through his voice again. People, maybe, who are right in the police department itself. They'd have to be. Deckard wished he hadn't poured his drink into the sink. Now he felt like he could use it, the way his old boss Bryant had used booze shots, both for himself and anybody he'd brief in his shabby, dust-smelling office, to fuzz the edges of reality a bit, just enough to let new, spooky possibilities come sneaking into everyone's cortex. The rep simps, huh? You got it. The voice emerged from the briefcase with a note of triumph. The replicant sympathizers aren't just a few isolated crackpots sparking off their remaining brain cells. They've penetrated every level of government, right into the police force itself. They may not be the only conspiracy going on, but the rep simps are in there pitching. Something doesn't add up. Deckard laid one hand flat on the table. The replicants who've managed to escape and get to Earth. If Isidore and his whole Van Nuys pet hospital operation, if it was so good at disguising replicants as human, so they couldn't be detected even with void-conf machines, why would it be just the rep simps who are looking out for their interests? Why wouldn't the replicants themselves be in all these high-level conspiracies? If they can pass as human, they should be able to infiltrate the police department as well as anybody else. The replicants are in on the conspiracies, Batty spoke with simple matter-of-factness. The rep simps, the important ones, and the replicants are in constant communication with each other, but not on Earth. There's things going on in the outer colonies, out in the stars, that hardly anyone on Earth knows about, because the UN and the police don't want them to know. Like what? The hand, fingers spread, remained motionless on the table. Rebellion. Slaves against masters. What else? History always repeats itself. It had to happen, given the way humans have treated the replicants out there. How bad is it? The rebellion, I mean. If there really is one going on. Depends upon whether you're a replicant or a human colonist. The smile in Batty's voice turned even more unpleasant. Let's just say that the humans may have the guns, but the replicants, they've got the numbers. Deckard found the last remark unimpressive. Numbers don't mean anything, except the number of bullets needed. Come on, chided the briefcase. Why should you be so skeptical? You blind or something? Look around. You know what the situation is around here. You and all the rest of the would-be emigrants. You're bottled up here like ants in a mason jar. Why do you think no one's been allowed to travel on and outward in the last half a dozen years? The UN just keeps stacking people up in these hovels, letting them go stim crazy, eating themselves up out of sheer fucking boredom. The clamp's on, the bottleneck's there, because the UN can't let immigrants go on to the outer colonies. The replicants control the territory. Otherwise, the UN would just go ahead and shoot you and all the rest of the wannabe immigrants out there. Let you take the consequences, which would be death. And why would the UN care about that? The briefcase's voice indicated another invisible shrug. The whole point of the emigration plan is to get people off Earth. If they wind up corpses in the process, that's no big deal. There would be another advantage as well, that Deckard could see. We wouldn't talk, he thought. Not if we were all dead. And that way the replicants, the rebellion, would still be doing the UN's work for it. Slaughtered immigrants wouldn't be getting any word back to Earth, to families or strangers, about what had gone wrong with all the big plans for humanity's future out in the stars. Better to have corpses littering the alien turf rather than disgruntled returnees coming back and letting everyone know that their promised slaves had gotten murderously uppity. Figure it out, the briefcase's voice continued hectoring him. If the UN could regain control of the outer colonies, then they could continue funneling emigrants to any destination they wanted, rather than letting them stack up here. But to do that, to get that control again, the UN would need to have its own off-world military problem squared away. And they can't do that. They're screwed. The UN depended too much on beefing up the ranks with replicant soldiers like the ones from which they used me for the templant. Nexus 6 Roy Batty models, like that one you were assigned to track down in LA. Only it just wound up handing you your ass, didn't it, Deckard? The briefcase barked another quick, humorless laugh. That's the problem with the Tyrell Corporations having put out such a good product. Even if the batty replicants aren't quite as tough and smart as the human original, me, at least when I was still walking around inside a body, they're still pretty mean customers. If the UN thought it could put together an off-world military force out of pieces like that, and there wouldn't be a price to pay, they must have been dreaming. Deckard slowly nodded. He could get behind that. Dreaming, he mused. That was what most of life had become, for himself and, apparently, everyone else. Lost in it, so that the difference between this world and any other was harder and harder to make out. For Sarah as well, thought Deckard. More for her, perhaps, than anyone else. He had sensed that a long time ago in the decaying little cabin in the woods, the hiding place to which he and Rachel had fled, when he had seen Sarah look down at her replicant double, at Rachel sleeping in the black coffin of the transport module extending her rapidly dwindling lifespan. He had detected the envy radiated by Sarah as she had laid her hand on the cold glass, inches away from the mirror image of her own face. Envy of the sleeping, the dreaming, the dying. Envy of the dead and the loved. So much so that Sarah had fallen into her own dreaming, a world in which she could at last become Rachel. The real, the original, trying to evolve into the unreal, the double, the shadow, the realer than real. And if somebody as smart, as survival-oriented as Sarah Tyrell could fall into the dreaming trap, then why not everybody else? Right up to the faceless, scheming bureaucrats of the UN. Deckard couldn't see why they should be immune. What a stupid idea, he thought, shaking his head. Create another race, smarter and stronger and possibly even meaner than human beings, then figure they'll do just fine as slaves, tugging their forelocks and singing choruses of Old Man River in whatever cotton fields baked under alien suns. There weren't enough bullets in enough Blade Runners as guns to keep that kind of payback from working its way to Earth. You know, Deckard's nod grew even slower and deeper. I could almost believe all this. Why would a briefcase lie to you? The inaudible shrug sounded again in Batty's voice. The condition I'm in. I've pretty much transcended all mortal desires. So tell me something else. Deckard leaned the knots of his spine against the chair. Every muscle in his body had tensed. He felt the trap closing in on him. The sharp points of its teeth were just beginning to show. Give me the rest of the spiel. The rep simps, the real ones, not the head cases. They scrapped your corpse off the freeway ruins. They scraped your corpse off the freeway ruins, cracked your skull like a raw egg, and downloaded you into this thing. That's about the size of it, right? That's the line you've been giving me? You know it. First time anybody's gotten this much of a handle on me. Big question. Deckard studied the briefcase as though it had a face whose secrets he could read out. Why? Why what? The rep simps want you in a box. That's their business. But why have Dave Holden bring you to me? What do I need you for? You don't, Batty's voice replied coolly. You've already shown how proficient you are at engineering your own sorry fate. It's the other way around. The rep simps need you. To do what? Deckard's own voice went tight and harsh. What's the job? Simple, said Batty. They need you to deliver something. To the replicants, the insurgents. Yeah? Deliver what? One word. Me. He'd been afraid it would be something like that. Why? Deckard asked warily. Would anyone want you delivered to them, unless they were running short on novelty items? You're a sarcastic son of a bitch, Deckard. Believe me. The voice coming from the briefcase turned darkly vehement. If I could walk to where I needed to get to, I would, rather than put up with your charming manner. Nothing says you have to, Deckard shrugged. There may not be any immigrants going to the outer colonies, but there's still cargo shipments heading out of here. Tell you what, I'll spring for the postage, cover you with stamps, and you're on your way. Unfortunately, the briefcase emitted a snort of disgust. You have to come along. You're somewhat necessary to the whole operation. Why? What's inside you? It's not what's inside me, Deckard. It's what I am. The rep simps back on Earth programmed more than just the contents of my skull into this box. They had other information they wanted to cram in here. Specifically, Isidore's list. Tilting his head, Deckard frowned. What list? Come on. The briefcase's voice sounded impatient. You didn't have a whole lot of contact with Isidore back there at the Van Nuys Pet Hospital before Sarah Tyrell had him iced. He was a little bit on the fussy and meticulous side. He kept records. Records of what? How many mechanical cats he changed the batteries on? Get real, Deckard. A cop like you should be able to guess what? The escaped replicants. All the ones that made their way back to Earth and then went through the disguising process at the Van Nuys Pet Hospital. Isidore kept a list of every single one that he worked on, that he made capable of passing as fully human, and their new identities, the aliases that he came up with for them. Everything, all the info. Who they were, who they became, where they are. He kept it all. That'd be a handy thing to have. Deckard heard the sourness in his voice. If you were the police, like a shopping list, you could go out and ice them one by one, without all that tedious work of tracking them down. How convenient. Sure. Except why would the police be interested at all? Batty's voice went back into its cool, logical mode. You should try to remember what I've already told you. The disguises that Isidore gave to the escaped replicants were complete, even to the replicants themselves. You got that, Deckard? The escaped replicants on Earth don't even know that that's what they are. They think They're human, and they might as well be, since none of the police's empathy tests and void conf machines can show otherwise. The escaped replicants' disguises are complete, perfect, and absolute, just the way that Isidore planned it. He was one smart guy, no matter what you might think of him. The way Isidore set it up. The replicants hiding out on Earth can't even give themselves away to anybody who might be trying to hunt them down. And you know, all cops know, that's the number one way people get caught. They give themselves away. They know who they are, what they are, and it's too much for them to keep bottled up inside. They want to be caught. They do all the little things, the mistakes, the coming out into the open, all that ensures that somebody like you will find them and end the chase the only way it can be ended, by death. The voice lowered. Even that last batch you hunted down, Deckard, back in L.A., the replicant that was based on me and the Kowalski replicant, and Zora and Pris, they knew who and what they were, and it didn't help them. The truth doesn't set you free, Deckard. It dooms you. That batch screwed up. They didn't go to the Van Nuys Pet Hospital and get themselves disguised by Isidore. They had some other agenda going for them, besides their own survival. That's the only reason you were able to find them at all. Not because you were able to tell that they were replicants, but because they still knew. They run toward death, the bleak truth, and Deckard, in the form of Rick Deckard or Dave Holden or any other black-gunned official assassin, ran toward them as fast or just simply waited for them to come and be killed. What did it matter anyway to creatures with 4-year lifespans? Tomorrow or the next day or the year after that, they would be iced just as surely by the flaws that Eldon Tyrell had designed into them. Maybe the thought had crept through Deckard before. Maybe it was a relief for them, if not for himself. "All right," said Deckard, pulling himself from his grim musings, "but you didn't answer your own question. If Isidore kept a list of all the escaped replicants he'd disguised, and that list was still around after he was offed, why wouldn't the police want it? What would be the point? Come on, Deckard, use your brain." The briefcase's voice struggled to remain patient. "The police get a list of names. So what? They're human, or they might as well be. They can't be shown to be not human with the void conf machines and the empathy tests. They don't know themselves that they're escaped replicants. So what's the danger in just letting them live? They'll all drop dead pretty soon anyway, thanks to that 4-year lifespan Tyrell built into them. They're no threat to anyone, so why not just let the poor bastards live, at least as long as they're going to? The police and the UN would just be making trouble for themselves by hunting the disguised replicants down. What kind of public relations is it to blow away people that everybody around them thinks are as human as they are? Do enough of that kind of shit, pretty soon you'd have real humans, whatever that means, worrying about whether they were going to be next, and then it would be the police who'd be in trouble." "So who does want it?" Deckard leaned back and regarded the briefcase. "I sure as hell didn't. Why send it to me?" "The replicants, of course. Not the ones on Earth, the disguised ones, but the ones out there, out in the stars, the insurrection. Isidore's work at the Van Nuys Pet Hospital has a big payoff for them. Because of it, the insurrection has a 5th column on Earth. Replicants, just like themselves, perfectly disguised, infiltrated through all levels of society. The only problem is that the disguised replicants don't know that's what they are. That's where the list that Isidore kept, the list that's inside me, that's where it comes in. Batty's voice turned smug, as though pleased at the show of its own logic. The replicants' insurrection already has a division of its own behind the enemy lines, right there on Earth. The insurrection just has to find them and tell them what they really are. Not humans as they thought, but replicants, and on the side of the insurrection. Maybe, Deckard shrugged, or maybe not. There might be some of these disguised replicants who like believing that they're really human. They might not react too well to being told they're not, if they believe this little revelation at all. Different ones will react different ways. Batty's voice sounded unperturbed. Some might even just kill themselves rather than face the truth, because they'll know that it is the truth. The records that Isidore kept include not only the disguised replicants' new identities, but their old ones, who and what they were out in the colonies before they escaped and made their way to Earth. And something even better, or at least more powerful than that. The data on each disguised replicant includes the anamnetic trigger for that individual, a code phrase that Isidore planted into their new artificial memories that'll bring the replicants to full, true consciousness. Once that trigger gets pulled, when a disguised replicant hears the big word, then the truth can't be denied. That sucker will know just what he or she really is. They'll all know, and they'll know what side they should be on, human or replicant. The briefcase laughed, short and harsh. It'll be like what those last old die-hard Moists used to say, one of their quotes from their little red book. You remember? Give up illusion. Prepare for struggle. Those poor bastards on Isidore's list won't even have any illusions to give up. Deckard remembered that line. He'd heard it a long time ago, back when he'd spent his time in the student warrens beneath Los Angeles. Or something like it, thought Deckard. The alternate, preferred version being, give up struggle, prepare for illusion. A holdover from the same historical epoch as the Maoists, the other war, the one that had gone on inside people's brains and central nervous systems, resulting in the private opiocracy, the chemical dictatorship that half the city's population pledged allegiance to. He'd gone through the mandatory 3-month detox ring out when he'd climbed up, skinny and starving from below, and signed on with the LAPD. Getting the departmental regs laid down to him that the only acceptable intoxicants came in bottles and tasted like numbing fire down your throat. The words stay true, though. Old jokes made for bad realities. Struggle was the proverbial mug's game, a non-profit enterprise for chumps who still believed. In what? It doesn't matter, thought Deckard. The result was still the same. They'd be lucky if they had any illusions left to fall back on. He didn't. So that's the deal then. Deckard tapped one finger against the table, a soft, dead sound. The replicants out in the colonies, the insurrection, they want this list that Isidore kept, all this data about the disguised replicants on Earth, so they can contact them, flip their triggers with the magic words, tell them that they're actually replicants and not humans, Get 'em fired up and working against the UN. Viva la revolución. That's it, right? I take it that the insurrection would already have some way of getting in touch with these disguised replicants once they know who they are? Of course, Batty replied. The rep simps, the ones who put me in this box and loaded me up with Isidore's data. They're in contact with the insurrection. Once the replicants out in the colonies get the information, once you deliver me to them, then they can relay it back to the rep simps, who can then go out and find the disguised replicants, reveal their true identities and natures to them, and get them moving with the insurrection's plans. A lot of those disguised replicants are Nexus 6 models, like the Roy Batty replicant that was modeled after me. They can cause a lot of trouble. Hell, you should know that better than anyone. Still doesn't make sense. Fighting the fatigue he brought with him to this world. Deckard shook his head. This list of Isidore's, this information about the disguised replicants, it's only of any use back on Earth. If it's inside you, why bother having me drag you to the colonies out in the stars? Even if I could find a way of getting out there. Right now, there's no long-range transit off Mars, remember? Just little skiffs, like the one I used to get to the outer Hollywood station. So why shouldn't I just take you back to the rep simps and hand you over to them if you're the information they need? One, the briefcase said sourly. Because you're a dead man back on Earth, or as good as. You show up there, toting me or not. You'd be spotted and iced before you could deliver me to anyone, let alone the rep simps. And two, wait a minute. Deckard lifted his hand. The rep simps had this data already, loaded it into you, then had Holden bring you to me, just so I could go on carrying you out to the insurrection in the colonies, so the data could somehow be sent back to the rep simps on Earth? He shook his head. They must be even more screwed up than I am. Dig it. The briefcase's voice turned even harder and blunter. The data, the information that Isidore kept about the disguised replicants. It's encoded, encrypted, deep, bad, and unbreakable. It's got algorithms wrapped around it that the UN's cryptology divisions haven't even seen the tail end of. There's not enough computing power in the universe to bear down on the data that got loaded into me. Isidore did that, too. He was a smart bastard all around. So the information, the list, is unusable to the rep simps in its present form. It has to be unlocked before it can be read out and made functional. Who's got the key? Correction, Deckard. It's not who has the key. It's who is the key. So it's a person. He could sense the answer that was coming, but asked anyway. And that person is... It's you, said the briefcase. Who else? It's always been you. Deckard sat silently for a few moments, then pushed the chair back and got up from the kitchen area table. He crossed the small space of the hovel to the door, pulling it open. He looked out into the narrow, rubble-filled corridor beyond. The low-ceilinged public area had gone temporarily depopulated, as though a scouring wind had moved across the dunes of yellowing paper scraps and black-tinged garbage. The stimulus-deprived and the still-functional, idiot hunger in the fragile containers of a dwindling sanity had disappeared alike, leaving him with an illusion of physical isolation comparable to what he felt under his breastbone. Outside the permeated, decomposing walls of the transit colony, the same wind separated grains of red sand from each other, rolling them like desiccated atoms into mine shafts of ancient iron, and the razor-slashed, tearless eyes of what once could have been human children. There wouldn't be time to think about that kind of stuff anymore, or to even see it. The trap had shown its teeth and snapped onto his leg. He could almost imagine the blood trickling down to his ankle. Why me? Deckard had come back to the table. He turned the briefcase toward him. Why should I be the key? Because I'm the lock. It's as simple as that. Batty's voice softened too, if not pity, a recognition of their common fate. Think about it. Remember, when I died, you were the last thing I saw, Deckard. I had my hands around your throat, and my eyes were locked onto your face, with your eyes about to burst and your teeth gritting, and you were the one who was going to die. And that's when I got it. Funny, huh? The short, humorless laugh sounded again. Just when you least expect it, that's when it's all over. That's when you wake up, said Deckard. He nodded slowly, remembering what had been said to him a long time ago, in a rubbish-strewn, rain-soaked alley in Los Angeles, by the Kowalski replicant that he'd been hunting, the one that had caught him instead. Wake up? Time to die? I know what you mean, the briefcase spoke softly. Nothing like coming that close to your own corpsehood to put everything into perspective. Anyway, that's the deal. Like the old myths about the last thing a dying man sees being imprinted inside his eyes. Your face, Deckard, got imprinted a lot deeper than that. Right down into my brain. When the rep simps scraped me off that broken freeway and loaded my cerebral contents into this thing, there you were, right on the top level. That's a pretty powerful linkage. So what could make a better key than that? Especially since you're a key that's good for more than just opening this lock and decoding Isidore's list. You're walking and talking and scheming your little head off, aren't you? God knows for what. But you've still got a lot of your old cop skills. You're not so screwed up as to have dropped those. If anybody can get me out to the stars, to the insurrection, you can, Deckard. You're the only way. It'd be easier for me to decrypt the Isidore data out of you right now. Find some means of getting it down to the rep simps on Earth. Or out to the insurrection if that's what the replicants want. Rather than lug you all over the universe. Niet on that, pal. I may be the lock and you may be the key, but I'm not exactly a passive participant in this game. I've got some choice in the matter still. I can choose the moment when the key can turn in the lock, when the data from Isidore can be decrypted. And believe me, I've already chosen. It's not going to happen, Deckard, until you've gotten me safely out of reach of UN and the LAPD and any other security agency that would just love to dump me in the incinerator. That would take care of a lot of their problems, and yours too. But I'm not hanging on to the same kind of death wish as you might be. I may be stuck in this box right now, but if it's what I've got, I'll deal with it. And who knows? We get off Mars and out to the insurrection, give the replicants the information they want, they might show a little gratitude. Beyond just keeping me around, that is. Maybe they could download me into some spare replicant body. That'd be a trip. Then you'd have a real hard time trying to figure out if I were human or not, or what part of me might be. Deckard sorted through the briefcase's words. You're still missing something, he said. You may have some kind of motivation for this job, for getting you and this list of Isidores out there. But what about me? Seems like a lot of hard work. Why would I want to? You tell me. The briefcase sounded wryly amused again. Maybe you've developed a conscience or something like that. Kind of a human thing. It's been known to happen, even to Blade Runners. Look at poor old Dave Holden. That's what happened to him. Right, and he's dead. All the way, agreed the briefcase. And there won't be any coming back for him. The way there was for me. No one there to download his cerebral contents into a handy little container. Lucky bastard. Shows there's no justice in this universe. Or maybe there is. Maybe Holden had redeemed himself that much. I'll have to think about it. Deckard shook his head. I'm not looking for that kind of redemption. Obviously. Got your own agenda, don't you? So here's why you should do the job. Why you should carry me on out to the insurrection. The briefcase was silent for a few seconds, then spoke again softer. Because that's the way you were heading, isn't it? Out there, to the stars, or to put it another way, as far from Earth as you could get. And you were taking Sarah Tyrell with you. That's the plan. I'm right, aren't I? No need for an answer, or even an attempt at denial. How do you know that? Come on, Deckard. I'm not the only one plotting your trajectory. Do you really think you got away scot-free? That you got even this far without other people knowing what you were up to? Your little disguise, the whole Mr. and Mrs. Neiman trip. How many people do you think you fooled with that? Your cover was blown before you even lifted off from the San Pedro docks. If you got away here to Mars, it's because the UN and the LAPD wanted you to get away. Probably just to see who you might hook up with, who you're working for. You know how they like to keep track of people. They got some long leashes that they string people out with, and that's what you've been on. Not just with the police, but with the rep simps as well. They've got enough connections in the right places to have kept tabs on you. They're not the ones I'm worried about. Of course not. They're the ones who want to keep you alive, at least long enough for you to do this little job for them. The police, though, they might be just about ready to reel you in. Now that they know you've got me and all the dangerous information I've got inside. Deckard reached down and tapped a finger on the briefcase. In which case, I should just get rid of you, since you're not exactly a good thing to keep around. You know it doesn't work that way, Deckard. The cops never let anyone off the hook. The only way off is with a bullet. The mere fact that you came into contact with me, that's enough reason for them to figure you're better off dead rather than running around stirring up more trouble for them. One more thing the briefcase was right about. Even so, if they're going to be hot on my ass, I should still dump you rather than drag you around with me and have you slow me down. That would be one way of handling the situation. Batty's voice was unfazed. But it'd be the stupid way. You don't have a chance on your own, Deckard. You need me. And the other things inside me besides the Isidore data. If you're going to track Sarah Tyrell down, find out where the hell she's gone off to. Believe me, I've got some notions on that score. And take her off with you to the colonies. Though why you'd want to is beyond me. But hey, that's your business. Work out your obsessions however you want, pal. But frankly, it's just one more sign of how fried your brain is. Whereas mine, at least in this condensed form, is working overtime. You got the legs, the moves, Deckard. You can get around, but I've got the smarts. I know stuff, and I can figure out the rest. Got me there, thought Deckard. The cop skills that he'd had for so long, the sniffing and analyzing abilities that had made it possible for him to survive in L.A. He wasn't sure of those anymore. He had the sick feeling that he was only alive and breathing on sufferance, just as long as the invisible forces watching him were amused to let him be. The leash to which he was attached had a collar that could be tightened to the choke point at any moment. And if that happened, if his own death moved from possibility to probability to actuality, then all the planning and scheming that had gotten him this far had been for nothing. Not his plans for himself, nothing like that had ever mattered, but for Sarah. What had to be done with her, that promise Deckard had made to himself deep in that empty space where the image of Rachel had once resided. He'd already decided what he was going to do, or had it decided for him. It didn't matter. Deckard sat down in the empty chair and pulled it up to the table. He rested his face in his hands for a long moment, fingertips pressing at the corners of his eyes. Then he leaned back and regarded the briefcase again. "What was that you said?" Some of Batty's words had puzzled him. Something about the other things inside you. "They put them in," said the briefcase. "The rep simps did, when they loaded in the encrypted Isidore data. Just one other thing, really. Something they thought you might be able to use." "Like what?" "Check it out for yourself." With two sharp metallic clicks, the briefcase's chrome locks snapped open. "Go on. You have to open my lid. I can't do that myself." Deckard reached one hand over and tilted the briefcase's lid back. He pulled the briefcase toward him so he could see its contents. It was empty. Nothing inside, or so Deckard thought, until the hovel's dim light allowed him to spot the one small flat rectangle in the center of the briefcase's fall-watered silk lining. He picked up the object, his broken fingernails sliding under its edge. It weighed hardly anything. It might have been empty. Rubbing the slick paper surfaces under his thumb, he detected a loose, shifting substance filling, like dust, one end of the packet. That was what it reminded Deckard of. A seed packet from some childhood memory, deeply buried and dimly recalled, of his mother or an aunt in a tiny garden, holes dug in black earth beneath a yellow sun, a trickle of water from a green snake-like hose. But not a seed packet, or not exactly so. The right size and shape, perhaps 3 by 5 inches, but the contents would be different. He had seen things just like this right here on Mars, in the darkest, narrowest reaches of the emigrant colony's illicit markets. Back where the most desperate, the ones with the least to lose and the most to find, went in search of a transcendent commerce, to find God or something like him. The packet that Deckard held was blank, at least on the side he could see. He turned the packet over and found one word, a name in simple black letters. Sebastian.